My name is Clara, and I thought that dinner was supposed to be a celebration. My boyfriend had just landed a big job, and his family invited me to join them at one of those fancy restaurants where the plates look more expensive than the food. I was nervous but happy, trying to make a good impression. But halfway through the meal, his father looked at me, smirked, and called me cheap trash in front of everyone. The whole table froze. That's when I decided his celebration was about to end by my hands. I spent the whole afternoon getting ready, rehearsing polite things to say in front of the mirror. My apartment was small, the kind of place where you can hear your neighbor's TV through the wall. I wanted to look perfect, even though nothing I owned was expensive. I ironed the same blue dress I'd worn to my cousin's wedding, brushed my hair, and practiced smiling. I told myself it didn't matter if they came from money, I'd make them see me for who I was. I really believed that at the time. Before leaving, I noticed a small red thread hanging loose on my sleeve. It looked tiny, harmless, but for some reason it bothered me. I tried to pull it off, but it only got longer, so I tucked it under the fabric and ignored it. I grabbed my bag, locked the door, and told myself this was just dinner, nothing more. I wanted to believe that this night would go smoothly, that his parents would see me as someone good for their son. I didn't know how wrong I was. My boyfriend texted me while I was waiting for the bus. He said his father could be a little blunt, but I shouldn't take it personally. I stared at that message for a while. It made my stomach twist. If you have to warn someone before a family dinner, it's never a good sign. Still, I smiled and sent back a heart emoji. I didn't want him to think I was nervous. I wanted to seem confident, the kind of girl who could handle anything, but I already felt something tightening inside me. The bus arrived, full of tired people heading home. I found an empty seat near the back and stared out the window. On the seat beside me, I noticed an old bus ticket from 1999, faded and barely legible. Someone had used it years ago, probably on this same route. I held it for a second, thinking how many lives pass through the same places. I tucked it in my bag like a small reminder that every moment connects to something before it. Maybe that's why I felt calm again. For a while, when the bus stopped near the restaurant, the first thing I noticed was the reflection of the glowing sign in the wet pavement. It was one of those places with glass walls and gold lettering, where waiters wear white shirts and speak softly. I stood outside for a few seconds, trying to fix my hair in the glass. I told myself I belonged there just as much as anyone. But deep down I already knew I'd walked into a world that wasn't built for people like me. I pushed open the door anyway. A woman at the front desk smiled politely and asked if I had a reservation. I told her the name of my boyfriend's family, and her expression changed like she knew exactly who they were. She led me through the main dining area to a corner table where they were already seated. The sound of cutlery and soft piano music filled the air. His parents looked elegant, untouched by time or worry. I suddenly felt very aware of my secondhand dress. I straightened my posture, pretending confidence I didn't feel. My boyfriend stood up and kissed my cheek. He seemed happy to see me, but there was a nervous edge in his smile. His mother's eyes scanned me from head to toe, polite but cool. His father didn't even look up from his phone. I sat down beside my boyfriend, folded my napkin neatly, and smiled like everything was fine. The waiter poured water, and I thanked him softly. I tried to blend into the background, hoping kindness could bridge whatever invisible distance already existed at that table. The first few minutes passed in small talk about the restaurant, the weather, and traffic. His parents spoke to each other more than to me. The waiter returned with menus, and I realized there were no prices printed next to the dishes. That kind of place. I pretended to read carefully, though I barely understood half the items listed. My boyfriend whispered a suggestion, but I waved it off and picked something simple. I didn't want to seem unsure. I didn't want them to see how out of place I felt. When the waiter came to pour wine, I declined. His father looked up for the first time, his expression unreadable. He asked why, and I said I didn't drink. He nodded once, but didn't hide his smirk. The rest of the table took their glasses. My boyfriend tried to change the topic, asking about his father's recent business trip. That finally sparked conversation, one that left me silent. They spoke in terms of deals, partners, and profits. I listened carefully, pretending interest. It felt like another language entirely. I smiled when they laughed, though I didn't always get the joke. My boyfriend squeezed my hand under the table, trying to comfort me. His mother asked where I was from, and I told her about the small neighborhood I grew up in. She nodded politely, but didn't ask any follow-ups. His father scrolled through his phone again, his thumb moving fast. The more they talked about success, the smaller I felt. I started to realize this wasn't just a dinner, it was a quiet kind of test. Then came the question I had been hoping to avoid. His father asked what my parents did for a living. I said my mother was a nurse, and my father left when I was young. The father's lips curved slightly, like he found something amusing about that. He nodded and turned to his wife, who looked away. The conversation didn't stop, but something about it changed. I couldn't explain it yet, only that every word after that felt sharper, like the table had quietly decided what kind of person I was. The food arrived, beautiful, tiny portions arranged like artwork. Everyone complimented their dishes, and I followed suit. I focused on cutting my food carefully, making sure not to drop anything. My boyfriend's father started talking about how his son's company was expanding. He bragged about connections, deals, and old family names that carried weight. I tried to seem impressed. His tone carried pride, but also something else. Ownership. It wasn't just about his son's success. It was about reminding everyone who was responsible for it, including me. His mother lifted her glass, toasting to the bright future ahead. Everyone clinked glasses. I joined, though mine was just water. The sound was cheerful, but I could feel tension humming underneath. His father laughed and said his son had good taste, especially in business, and maybe in other choices too. His glance landed on me for the first time in the night. I smiled faintly, unsure if it was a compliment or something meant to sting. My boyfriend laughed awkwardly. The father's smirk told me it wasn't kindness. I tried to breathe evenly, to focus on finishing the meal, but his words hung in the air, unspoken meaning heavy behind them. I looked around the restaurant, noticing the waiters avoiding eye contact with me. Maybe they'd seen this kind of thing before. People with power treating others like props at their table. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make him regret it, but I said nothing. I smiled, nodded, and held my ground quietly, still hoping to prove I wasn't what he thought. Then he did it. The line that still echoes in my head. He leaned back, folded his hands, and said he admired girls like me, the kind who aim high. His tone carried that mocking sweetness people use when they want to hurt without raising their voice. Then he said it, cheap trash, laughed while saying it. The sound of cutlery stopped. My boyfriend's face turned red. His mother froze mid-sip. I sat there, every nerve awake. I wasn't angry yet. I was calm, too calm. That calm always meant danger. No one said anything for a long few seconds after that. My boyfriend shifted in his seat, eyes darting between me and his father, but his mouth stayed shut. His mother tried to smile like nothing happened, asking the waiter to bring dessert. I sat there with my hands in my lap, forcing myself to stay calm. My stomach twisted, but my face didn't move. Inside, I felt something click. It wasn't pain or embarrassment. It was focus, the kind that shows up when you finally decide you're done pretending. His father went back to eating as if the moment had never happened. I could see the waiter hesitate before refilling his glass. The sound of forks scraping plates filled the silence. I realized no one would defend me, not even the man sitting beside me. I stared at my water glass, seeing my reflection trembling inside it. Then I stopped shaking. I wasn't the one who should be ashamed. I straightened my shoulders and looked up. My decision had already been made, even if I didn't yet know the details. I pushed my plate aside, leaning back slightly. His mother noticed, but didn't speak. My boyfriend whispered something under his breath, maybe asking me to stay calm, but my mind wasn't on them anymore. It was on the quiet weight of his father's words. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn respect from people who thought they owned it. I'd begged, worked, and smiled for it. But that night, something in me changed. Respect wasn't something to be given anymore. It was something to take back. The waiter arrived with the dessert menu, holding it like a peace offering. His father barely glanced at it, saying he already knew what he wanted. "Bring the celebration cake," he said proudly. The waiter nodded and left quickly. My boyfriend's mother gave a strained smile, asking what we were celebrating. He went on about his recent promotion, how his staff admired him, how success runs in the blood. I watched him talk, his voice full of arrogance. For a man so proud of his control, he never noticed it slipping. When the waiter returned, he carried a small chocolate cake with a single candle in the center. Everyone clapped lightly, pretending to share in the joy. His father raised his glass, preparing to give a toast. The flicker of the candlelight danced across his face, showing every line of pride that had hardened into cruelty. He began thanking everyone for being there, praising himself in the process. My hands were folded, steady, but my thoughts were sharp. He had celebrated by belittling others his entire life. Tonight, it would stop. He lifted his glass higher, talking about his son's bright future, and how good choices make all the difference in life. I could hear the meaning behind it, the quiet insult aimed my way. My boyfriend tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. I smiled politely, though. My heart was beating steady with purpose. I knew he expected me to shrink away and let the insult fade into laughter. That was his mistake. I wasn't going to sit quietly and let him define who I was anymore. When he finished speaking, everyone clapped softly. The waiter hovered nearby, unsure whether to leave or stay. I picked up my water glass and raised it slightly. "To lessons learned," I said, my voice calm but clear. Everyone turned to look at me. His father grinned, thinking I was joining his toast. I held his eyes while taking a sip, refusing to look away. The air around the table felt thin. I knew what I was about to do might end everything, but I also knew I'd never forgive myself if I didn't. His father laughed, saying something smug about young people in confidence. That gave me my opening. I placed my glass down, keeping my tone even. I started talking about how success often depends on timing and help from the right people. I said some people like to forget that their victories weren't built alone. His smirk faltered. My boyfriend's mother looked uneasy. I mentioned how some partners stay silent while others carry the real weight. The color drained slightly from his father's face. I hadn't even said his name yet. I leaned forward just a little, my hands folded neatly on the table. I told them I once worked for a man who helped rebuild a failing business years ago, one that had nearly collapsed because of poor leadership. I said that man never asked for credit, but everyone in the industry knew who he'd saved. My boyfriend's fork slipped from his hand, clattering onto his plate. His father's jaw tightened. He knew exactly who I was talking about. His company, his past. The one secret he thought no one at this table knew. The table went completely still. His mother glanced between us, realizing what was happening. My boyfriend whispered my name, but I didn't stop. I told them how I left that company years ago, wanting to start over. How I met someone kind, who didn't seem like his father at all. His father's fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. He tried to laugh it off, asking what I was implying, but his voice cracked halfway through. I smiled softly. "Only that I know what's worth celebrating," I said. His father slammed his glass down, not hard enough to break it, but enough to spill the wine. The waiter rushed over with napkins. No one spoke. The sound of plates and quiet murmurs from other tables filled the background. I could feel every pair of eyes on us. My boyfriend sat frozen, unsure what to do. I wasn't angry anymore, just certain. The power in that moment wasn't his. It was mine. He had built his life on control, but tonight, his own arrogance handed it to me. I thanked them for the meal and pushed my chair back. My voice was calm, almost gentle. His mother's eyes followed me, but she didn't stop me. The waiter stood nearby, unsure whether to move or not. I placed my napkin on the table and looked directly at his father. I told him I'd brought a gift. A small gesture of goodwill. I reached into my bag, pulled out a small jar of imported coffee beans, and placed it in front of him. It was meant as a thank you gift. Now it wasn't. He looked confused, asking what it was supposed to mean. I told him it was a reminder that some things, no matter how expensive, still go bitter if treated wrong. His wife pressed her lips together, hiding a smile. My boyfriend stared at the jar like it was about to explode. I turned and walked toward the exit, feeling his father's gaze burning behind me. The candle on his cake flickered, wax dripping onto the frosting. I didn't look back. I just kept walking toward the glass doors and the street beyond. Outside, the city lights hit me like fresh air. Cars passed, horns, distant and harmless. I leaned against the cool wall of the restaurant, closing my eyes for a second. The tension began to slide off my shoulders. Inside, they were probably still sitting there in silence. For the first time that night, I felt steady, grounded. I didn't need to win anyone's approval. I had taken back my voice, and that was enough. I looked down the street, deciding I wasn't going to wait for anyone to catch up. The restaurant door opened behind me. For a second, I thought it might be my boyfriend following me, but it was just a waiter stepping out to smoke. He gave me a quick nod before lighting his cigarette. I smiled faintly and walked toward the corner where the buses stopped. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't read. I knew what they said. Apologies, explanations, maybe anger. None of it mattered anymore. Before I tell you what happened next, take a moment to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. It helps more than you think. The rain started just as I reached the bus stop. It wasn't heavy, just enough to blur the lights on the pavement. I didn't run for cover. I stood there, letting the drops soak into my hair. The sound of tires hissing on wet asphalt filled the air. The smell of rain mixed with perfume still clinging to my skin. It felt like the world washing something off me, something I didn't need to carry anymore. I was alone, but for the first time that night, that word didn't scare me. When the bus arrived, I climbed on and took a seat near the back again, the same spot as before. My reflection stared back at me in the dark window, eyes sharper than they had been earlier. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old ticket from 1999. I looked at it again, the faded ink, the tiny holes from the punch machine. I realized I wasn't the same person who found it hours ago. That girl wanted to belong. The one holding it now wanted freedom. The bus rattled through the streets, past glowing windows and half-empty stores. My phone buzzed again, but I ignored it. I watched the city move like a slow film outside. The driver hummed quietly to himself, a tune I didn't recognize. It was peaceful. For once, no one was watching me, no one judging my words or clothes. I pressed my forehead to the glass, feeling the faint vibration of the road. Somewhere behind me, laughter from another passenger broke the quiet. It sounded light, real, something I hadn't felt in years. When I got off at my stop, the street was slick with rain. Puddles caught the streetlights, turning the ground into tiny mirrors. I walked past the small bakery that was already closed, its windows fogged from the ovens inside. My shoes squelched with each step, but I didn't care. I passed a couple arguing softly under an umbrella, their words blending with the rain. I wondered if they'd remember this night years from now. Probably not, but I would. I'd remember the night I stopped being afraid to speak. Back in my apartment, I hung my wet coat and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence felt different, calm, not empty. I kicked off my shoes and stared at the ceiling for a while. My phone buzzed again. This time, I checked it. Dozens of missed messages. My boyfriend had written things like, "Why did you say that? And you embarrassed my father." Not a single word about what his father said to me. That told me everything I needed to know. I powered the phone off, permanently. I changed into comfortable clothes and caught my reflection in the mirror. My makeup was smudged, my hair damp, but my eyes looked clearer than they had in a long time. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hand brushed the sleeve of my blue dress where the red thread had been. It was still there, now a little frayed from the rain. I took a small pair of scissors from the drawer and cut it off, letting it fall into the sink. That felt right. The night stretched quietly outside, the rain easing into a soft drizzle. I opened the window a little, letting the cool air drift in. It smelled clean, like everything was starting over. I sat by the window with my knees drawn up, holding the glass of water in both hands. The city below moved slowly, headlights gliding through wet streets. I thought about how fast everything can change. One sentence, one insult, one decision. I hadn't planned any of it. But maybe some things don't need planning. Maybe truth only needs timing. I reached into my purse and found the old bus ticket again. The edges were curling now, damp from the rain. I smiled and set it on the table beside my bed. It wasn't worth anything, but it reminded me of something simple: movement. Life keeps going, even when people try to stop you. I lay back on the bed, listening to the faint hum of the city. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace without needing anyone to give it to me. That peace was mine. As I closed my eyes, I thought about his mother's face before I left. There had been something in her eyes, something like quiet approval. Maybe she had lived through her own version of that dinner. Maybe she wanted to stand up to him but never found the right moment. I wondered if she would remember my words. I hoped she would. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to bow to make others start questioning why they ever did. Maybe that was the real victory tonight. By morning, sunlight crept through the blinds, warming the room. I woke with a clear head and no trace of regret. My phone stayed off. I brewed coffee, using the last of the cheap beans from the corner store. It tasted better than any imported blend ever could. As I sipped, I thought about how his father believed he had humiliated me, but he'd only revealed his own emptiness. Some people build their pride on making others small. I wasn't small anymore. Not to him, not to anyone. I decided to take a long walk before heading to work that morning. The city was already alive. Cars honking, people rushing with coffee cups in hand. Everything looked normal, which almost made the night before feel unreal, but the calm inside me reminded me it happened. I passed the same restaurant from a distance. The gold letters on the glass looked less intimidating in the daylight. I wondered if his family ever talked about what happened after I left, or if they just pretended it never took place. My thoughts drifted back to my boyfriend. He had sent so many messages that I could almost guess their tone: confused, defensive, maybe even blaming me. I thought about the way he froze when his father insulted me. That moment said more than words ever could. Silence is its own kind of choice. I realized he wasn't cruel like his father, but he lacked courage, and that can be just as dangerous. I didn't hate him. I just saw him clearly now. That kind of clarity doesn't fade easily. At work, I stayed quiet, finishing my tasks faster than usual. My coworkers joked around, asking if I'd had a rough night. I smiled and said it was just eventful. I didn't want to share the details. Some things lose their power once you start explaining them to people who weren't there. During lunch, I stepped outside to eat alone. The sound of church bells rang faintly from blocks away. For some reason it comforted me. It reminded me that even after ugly nights, the world keeps its rhythm. That evening, I called my mother. She didn't know about the dinner yet. I told her in the simplest way possible, leaving out the sharp edges. She listened quietly, letting me talk. Then she said something that stayed with me. People like him don't know the value of kindness until it's gone. Her words weren't angry, just certain. I thanked her and promised to visit soon. She told me she was proud of me, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. It was the first time I smiled that day. The next few days felt strange. The quiet between me and my boyfriend stretched until it broke. He showed up at my apartment once, unannounced. I didn't open the door. I listened as he stood outside, trying to explain himself through the wood. He said things like, "You overreacted, and you made things worse." I stayed silent, holding my breath until his voice faded away. When he left, I felt lighter, not sad. Some relationships don't end with shouting. They end when you finally stop hoping the other person will change. A week passed before I heard anything from his family. One afternoon, a small letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a short note written in neat cursive. It was from his mother. She thanked me for standing up to her husband, saying she hadn't seen him look speechless in years. She called what I did necessary. I read the letter twice. There were no apologies, but there was honesty. I tucked it into my desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as proof that truth has witnesses. That night, I dreamt I was back at the restaurant. The table was empty, except for the birthday cake, untouched and flickering. I sat across from it, watching the candle burn down to a puddle of wax. In the dream, no one else appeared, just me and the fading flame. When I woke, the image stayed in my mind. It wasn't haunting, it was closure. Every insult, every silence, had burned away. Only the ashes of that night remained, and I was fine with that. Some endings don't need anyone's permission. I started waking up earlier, drinking coffee by the window before work. The mornings felt calmer now. My phone stayed quiet most days, and I liked it that way. I didn't feel the urge to check messages or scroll through old photos. I was learning to live without noise. On weekends, I walked through the local market, greeting the same faces. People there knew me without judgment. They asked how my week was, and I gave real answers. No pretending, no performance. Just small pieces of truth exchanged like currency. One Sunday, while cleaning, I found the jar of imported coffee beans sitting on my shelf. I had bought 2 that night, one for his father and one for my own home. I opened it and smelled the rich aroma. It was sharp, bold, and expensive, but it didn't feel special anymore. I poured the beans into my grinder and brewed them anyway. The taste was strong but bitter, almost harsh. I smiled to myself. It was exactly what it needed to be, a reminder that expensive doesn't always mean good. After finishing my cup, I went out for a walk. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. I passed by the park where children were playing and parents sat on benches, talking softly. A small boy tripped and fell, then stood up laughing. I watched him brush the dirt from his knees and keep running. That moment stayed with me. It reminded me that strength isn't always about fighting back loudly. Sometimes it's just about getting up quietly and continuing forward, no matter who tried to push you down. Days turned into weeks, and I didn't think much about that dinner anymore. It had become part of my story, but not the whole story. At work, I started helping new employees settle in. One of them, a shy girl, fresh out of school, reminded me of myself. She always second-guessed her words. I began guiding her through things, showing her how to speak up gently, but firmly. Watching her grow more confident felt rewarding. Maybe that was my new way of taking back power, by helping others find theirs. One evening, as I left work, I noticed the sky turning pink and orange. The sunset painted the buildings in soft light. I stopped at a small coffee stand, the kind with handwritten menus and laughter behind the counter. The barista greeted me by name, asking if I wanted the usual. That simple recognition made me smile. I realized this was the kind of acceptance I had always wanted, not from people with wealth or power, but from ordinary faces that saw me as enough just the way I was. As I walked home, the sound of a distant bell echoed again. I didn't know where it came from, maybe a church or a passing bicycle, but it felt familiar. That sound had followed me since that night, not hauntingly, but like a quiet reminder of change. I paused at the corner, letting the sound fade. Maybe it was just life's way of saying I was still here, still moving, still becoming. Every sound, every step, felt like part of something bigger, even if I couldn't name it yet. That night, rain started falling again. I opened my window and listened. The drops tapped against the glass rhythmically, steady and calm. I made a cup of tea and sat near the window with a blanket around my shoulders. My room smelled faintly of the mint tea and the rain outside. I thought about how simple moments like this used to feel empty, but now they carried peace. I didn't need a perfect life or perfect approval. I just needed space to breathe and know that I had finally chosen myself. The following morning, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated before answering. It was my old employer, the silent partner I had mentioned that night at dinner. He said he'd heard about what happened and admired how I handled it. I didn't know how he found out, but I thanked him. Then he surprised me. He offered me a position at a new project he was starting, something that helped small business owners rebuild. It sounded like meaningful work. I told him I'd think about it, and I meant it. For the rest of the day, I kept turning his offer over in my mind. The pay would be better, the work more fulfilling, but it also meant stepping back into a world that had once looked down on me. I wasn't sure I wanted that, but then again, maybe it was time to stop running from the spaces that had once rejected me. Maybe I could walk back into them on my own terms. This time, not asking for approval, just bringing my own worth through the door. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, writing down pros and cons. My handwriting looked uneven under the lamp's light. The longer I wrote, the clearer it became that fear was the only thing holding me back. Not their judgment, not my past, just fear of trying again. I closed the notebook and looked around my apartment. It was small, but everything inside it was mine. Every choice, every mark on the wall, every quiet morning. I smiled, realizing that was enough reason to try. The next morning, I called my old employer back and accepted the offer. His voice sounded pleased, like he had been expecting me to say yes. He told me I'd start next week. After hanging up, I felt an unfamiliar lightness, the kind that comes from stepping into something new without looking back. I made myself breakfast, toasted some bread, and looked out the window at the street below. The world didn't change around me, but something inside me did. I was no longer surviving. I was beginning again. That weekend, I bought myself a small gift, a silver bracelet with a single red thread woven through it. It wasn't expensive, but it meant something to me. It reminded me of the dress I wore that night, and how something small and imperfect could become a symbol of strength. Every time I looked at it, I felt grounded, not angry, not bitter, just sure of who I was now. I no longer needed to prove my worth. I wore it not as a memory, but as a quiet declaration of freedom. My first day at the new job came quickly. The office was bright and modern, filled with people who greeted me kindly. My new role involved helping small business owners organize their finances and rebuild what they'd lost. I listened to their stories, failures, debts, fresh starts, and realized how similar we all were. Everyone carried some version of embarrassment, something that pushed them down once, but we kept standing back up anyway. That realization gave my work meaning. It was no longer just a job, it felt like redemption in small pieces. A few weeks into the job, I received another message from my ex-boyfriend. This one was short. He said his father had been quiet ever since that night, barely speaking during family dinners. He said he missed me. I read the words slowly, trying to see if they meant anything to me. They didn't. I deleted the message without replying. Some apologies come too late to matter. I didn't hate him, but he no longer belonged in the story I was writing for myself. That chapter had already ended cleanly. One evening after work, I stopped at the same restaurant again. This time, I didn't go inside. I stood across the street, watching through the glass. Inside, I saw his father sitting with business associates, his smile polite but hollow. The light from the chandelier made his face look older. I wondered if he ever thought about that night. Probably, but it wasn't my concern anymore. I turned away and walked toward the nearest bus stop, feeling nothing but calm. I had taken back everything he tried to take from me. On the bus ride home, the city passed by in soft lights and shadows. I sat near the same window where I'd found the old ticket weeks ago. This time the seat was empty, except for a faint imprint where it once lay. I smiled, thinking maybe someone else had found it, and carried it forward. The hum of the bus and the chatter of passengers filled the air. It felt ordinary, but beautifully so. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was moving through it, freely and fully awake. When I got home, I made tea and stood on my balcony, watching the street below. People moved through their own stories, some arguing, some laughing, some walking alone. I thought about the concept of Sonder, that quiet realization that everyone has their own world of memories and struggles. It made me feel small in a good way. My story wasn't the biggest, or the worst, or the most painful. It was just mine, and that was enough. The night air felt kind, like it was welcoming me home. I went inside, turned on a small lamp, and sat at my desk. The letter from his mother was still in the drawer. I read it again before putting it away for good. I didn't need reminders anymore. My life had moved forward, and so had I. Before bed, I tied my bracelet a little tighter around my wrist and whispered a quiet thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just to the life that kept giving me second chances. I turned off the light, feeling peace instead of pain. The following week brought new faces to my office. A group of small business owners came in for consultations, each with their own story of struggle and hope. One woman reminded me of myself, a little unsure, but determined to stand tall. She owned a small bakery that was failing due to rising costs. I helped her reorganize her expenses, showing her where she could save. She thanked me with a shaky smile and offered me a loaf of bread. It was warm and soft, and for some reason, it made my day brighter. That night, I sat at home, eating that same bread with soup. It wasn't fancy, but it tasted real, full of effort and heart. I realized how far I'd come since that dinner. I used to think I needed to fit into their version of success. Expensive restaurants, fine wine, polished words. But now I understood something better. Real success was quiet. It was being proud of who you are, even when others can't see your worth. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I just needed to live truthfully. As the days passed, my confidence grew. My boss started trusting me with bigger projects. He said I had a natural ability to connect with people, to make them feel seen. I smiled when he said that, because I finally believed it. Before, compliments used to make me uncomfortable. I'd brush them off, not wanting to seem proud. But now, I let them stay. I had earned them. Every kind word felt like a small piece of the wall I'd built inside was being taken down, brick by brick. One afternoon, I received a call from my mother. She sounded cheerful, asking if I was free that weekend. She wanted to have dinner together at home. I agreed instantly. It felt like a full circle moment, to go from one dinner that broke me to another that would rebuild me. When Saturday came, she made my favorite meal, simple and warm. We sat at her old kitchen table, the same one I grew up around. I told her about my new job, my bracelet, and how peaceful life had become. My mother listened with pride shining in her eyes. She said she'd always known I had strength in me, even when I doubted it. We talked for hours about small things, the neighborhood, her friends, her plans to repaint the house. It was the kind of conversation that felt soft but meaningful. As I helped her wash dishes afterward, she said something that stuck with me. "Peace isn't found in silence," she said. "It's found in honesty." I thought about that all night. After I went home, she was right. Monday morning arrived, with gray skies and light drizzle. I walked to work with my umbrella, listening to the soft patter above me. The street smelled faintly of wet pavement and fresh coffee. The city felt calmer on days like that. People moved slower, kinder. I thought about how rain always felt like a reset button, washing away what no longer needed to stay. As I reached my office, I realized I wasn't carrying any heaviness from the past. The insult, the humiliation, the anger. It had all dissolved quietly. At lunch, I sat by the window, overlooking the city park. I saw kids playing in the puddles, their laughter cutting through the noise of traffic. I thought about how easy it is to forget what joy looks like when life teaches you to stay guarded. Watching them reminded me that not everything has to be a battle. Sometimes, just existing, unbothered, is its own kind of rebellion. I finished my sandwich, feeling calm. My reflection in the glass didn't look like someone who had been broken. It looked free. That evening, while leaving the office, I saw a familiar face near the entrance. My ex-boyfriend stood there, holding an umbrella and looking uncertain. I froze for a second, not out of fear, but surprise. He walked up to me, saying he just wanted to talk. I didn't answer right away. The rain made tiny circles on the sidewalk between us. He apologized for what happened, said he should have defended me. His words were soft, rehearsed. I nodded politely, but inside I already knew this wasn't a reunion, it was closure. He asked if we could get coffee and talk properly. I told him no, not unkindly, but firmly. I said I didn't carry anger anymore, just distance. He looked disappointed, maybe even relieved. We stood there for a moment, both knowing this was the last time we'd see each other. I wished him well and walked away. My shoes splashed through the rain, and each step felt like freedom. Sometimes, saying nothing cruel is the most powerful goodbye you can give. The past had ended where it needed to. That night, I came home, set my wet umbrella aside, and made myself tea. I curled up on the couch, letting the quiet fill the room. I thought about how life has a way of balancing itself. If you stop forcing it, the same rain that used to make me feel lonely now felt like company. The same silence that once scared me now felt peaceful. I wasn't waiting for approval, or for someone to tell me I'd done the right thing. I already knew I had. That was enough. The next few weeks went by quickly. My work continued to grow, and I started managing small teams. One of the business owners I'd helped invited me to visit her bakery again. When I arrived, the shelves were full, the air smelled sweet, and the place was busy. She hugged me tightly, saying my advice saved her business. I looked around at her smiling customers and felt something warm inside me. Maybe healing doesn't happen in one big moment. Maybe it's built slowly, through kindness returned to the world. After leaving the bakery, I stopped by the park again. The trees were turning golden, leaves scattering across the paths. I sat on a bench, watching people walk dogs and share conversations. A small bell from a nearby ice cream cart jingled faintly in the wind, that same familiar sound again, the bell that always seemed to follow me since that night. I smiled this time. Maybe it wasn't coincidence. Maybe it was life's small way of reminding me that I'd turned something painful into peace. I accepted that quietly. That evening, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months. I didn't write about the dinner or the insult. I wrote about how it felt to start over. I listed the things I was grateful for. My job, my mother, the bakery woman, even the rain. Gratitude didn't erase what happened, but it reshaped it. The page filled slowly, each word a small step away from the girl I used to be. I closed the notebook and sat quietly. I felt proud, not for surviving, but for changing. As weeks turned into months, I started to notice something different about how people treated me. Not because of anything I said, but because of how I carried myself now. Confidence has a quiet weight. You don't need to announce it. It just shows. I was calmer in meetings, firmer in boundaries, lighter in spirit. I no longer worried about being liked. I just focused on being real. And the strange thing was, people seemed drawn to that. The same authenticity I once hid had become my strength. One morning, while grabbing coffee before work, I overheard two people arguing about promotions and favoritism. Their voices reminded me of that restaurant, the same tone of superiority disguised as humor. I almost laughed. Once, I might have shrunk in that moment, afraid to be noticed. Now, I just ordered my drink and walked out. The world hadn't changed. People still judged, still looked down, but I had. The difference was enough. Their words didn't land anywhere near me anymore. I'd built a peace they couldn't touch. That night, I took a walk around the city. The lights shimmered on wet roads, and a soft breeze carried the smell of rain. I passed by street musicians playing softly near a corner cafe. Their music filled the air with something that felt like forgiveness. I dropped a few coins into their case and kept walking. Life felt open again, like the world was no longer a test I had to pass. It was just there to live in, to breathe in, to be part of, without apology. Later, while waiting at a crosswalk, I caught my reflection in a shop window. For the first time, I didn't see someone trying to prove her worth. I saw a woman who had already proven it, to herself. That realization made me laugh softly. I remembered that red thread on my old dress, the one I used to hide. It had followed me through the worst night of my life, and somehow it had become my symbol of strength. Maybe imperfections aren't flaws. Maybe they're proof that we're real. Back home, I made dinner while music played quietly in the background. I moved easily through the kitchen, humming along to the tune. I wasn't thinking about the past anymore. My life was smaller in some ways, but fuller in others. Every small act, boiling water, folding clothes, turning off lights, felt like its own kind of grace. I used to think big moments defined people. Now I understood it's the small, steady choices that shape who we are. Every one of them mattered, even the ones no one sees. Before bed, I checked my emails and found one from my boss. He congratulated me on a project I'd finished early and said he wanted to discuss promoting me. I smiled, but didn't rush to reply. I wanted to enjoy that quiet sense of pride for a while. The version of me from that dinner would have sought approval right away, afraid of losing it. But this version didn't. I didn't need to chase praise anymore. It was nice to be appreciated, but I was already enough without it. That night, I dreamt of walking down a long road lined with lights. At the end of it stood a mirror. When I looked inside, I didn't see my reflection. I saw every version of myself I had ever been: the insecure girl, the angry woman, the calm one. They all stood together, and none of them looked out of place. When I woke up, it felt like understanding. Growth doesn't erase the past. It just folds it gently into who you are and lets it rest there without pain. The following weekend, I visited my mother again. She had baked cookies and insisted I take half home. We spent the afternoon watching an old movie, laughing at how predictable it was. At one point, she looked at me and said I seemed lighter, happier. I told her I finally felt free. She nodded, saying, "That's the best kind of success there is." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until that moment. Her words felt like a quiet stamp of approval I didn't even know I wanted. On my way back home that evening, I passed by the same bus stop where I once held that faded ticket from 1999. The bench had been repainted, clean and bright. I sat there for a few minutes, watching the buses come and go. The city had changed, but some parts stayed familiar. A child nearby dropped his candy and started crying until his mother comforted him. I smiled softly, realizing how much of life is just learning to comfort our own younger selves and keep moving forward anyway. Back home, I placed my mother's cookies on the table and poured a glass of milk. I sat quietly, enjoying the sweetness, thinking about how something so small could hold so much warmth. I looked around my apartment. The same space that once felt lonely, now filled with peace. It wasn't about wealth or luxury. It was about calm. I turned on a soft lamp, letting the light fill the room. My bracelet glimmered faintly under it. I touched it gently, grateful for everything it had come to mean. That night, I stepped out onto the balcony again. The city below glowed in soft yellow light. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool air. My life wasn't perfect, but it finally felt like mine. I thought about how I had once been called cheap trash and how wrong that label had been. It didn't define me. It defined him. I wasn't broken by it. I was refined by it. The insult had burned away the fear that used to hold me back. That was its only gift. As I went back inside, I felt something quiet settle in my chest. Not pride, not relief, but peace. True peace. I turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the city filtering through the curtains. I lay down and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, my thoughts didn't race. The night didn't feel heavy. It felt whole, whatever came next in my life. I knew I could face it with grace. I had already proven to myself that I could rise after being dismissed. The next morning began quietly. I woke before sunrise. The room tinted blue by the early light. I brewed coffee and sat by the window, watching people hurry to work below. Life kept moving, indifferent to victories and losses. I liked that. It made everything feel balanced. As I sipped, I thought about the new week ahead. My boss had mentioned a big project, one that would require traveling. The idea excited me. A few months ago, the thought of change would have scared me. Now it felt like something to embrace. At work, the office buzzed with energy. My team was preparing presentations for upcoming investors. My boss called me into his office and said he wanted me to lead the project. I blinked for a second, unsure if I heard him right. He said I had earned it through hard work and calm leadership. That word calm stood out. I used to think being calm meant being passive. Now I knew it meant having control without shouting for it. I accepted the role with quiet confidence. It felt like a milestone. The following week, I traveled to another city to meet potential clients. It was my first work trip, and the excitement mixed with nerves. The hotel wasn't luxurious, but it was comfortable. I unpacked and sat on the edge of the bed, remembering that restaurant night for the first time in a while. The memory no longer stung. It felt distant, like an old movie I had already watched and understood. Sometimes healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means seeing the same memory differently, from a stronger place. I smiled and slept easily. The next morning, I stood before a conference room filled with business owners. I explained our new program clearly, answering every question with patience. I noticed the nods, the interest, the trust. These were the moments that defined me now, not that old humiliation. When the presentation ended, The room applauded lightly. My boss shook my hand afterward. Proud. I didn't feel like I'd proven anyone wrong. I'd simply proven myself right. That I belonged in every room I walked into. That was the real victory. The one that lasted. After the conference, I took a walk through the city. The streets were lined with old brick buildings and small shops. A bakery caught my attention, its window full of pastries. I went in and bought a single cupcake. The woman behind the counter smiled warmly, saying it was on the house. I thanked her and stepped outside to eat it on a bench. The sweetness reminded me of that untouched cake on the table months ago. But this time, the sweetness wasn't tied to anger. It was tied to peace. That evening, I received a text from my boss, saying the clients were thrilled. He said my name would be included in the final proposal credits. I set the phone down and looked out the hotel window. The skyline glittered in the distance, full of quiet promise. I thought about how strange life can be, how something meant to break you can become the very thing that builds you. I wasn't lucky. I was prepared, shaped by moments I once wished had never happened. I finally understood their purpose. Before heading home, I stopped by a small local shop selling handmade items. On a shelf, I found a jar of imported coffee beans, the same kind I had given his father that night. I picked it up, turning it in my hands. The label looked identical. I smiled, realizing I didn't hate the memory anymore. It no longer held pain, just perspective. I bought the jar, not as a reminder of him, but as proof of how far I'd come. I would brew it my way this time, without bitterness. When I returned home, my apartment felt different. Warmer somehow. Maybe it was me who had changed, filling the space with a calmer energy. I placed the jar on the counter and unpacked my things. The city outside hummed softly, steady and alive. I brewed the new coffee and watched the steam rise. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and comforting. I poured myself a cup and took a slow sip. It was strong, but not bitter. I laughed quietly to myself. Maybe everything tastes better when you've earned peace first. A few days later, I received another letter. This time, it was typed neatly on formal stationery. It was from his mother again. She said her husband had stepped down from his company. She didn't give details, only that things were different now. She thanked me again for saying what she never could. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my notebook. Some stories close on their own, even when you've already stopped reading them. That dinner was over, in every sense. I didn't need another ending. Later that week, I decided to visit the park. The trees were almost bare, and the ground was covered in golden leaves. Children were jumping into piles of them, their laughter echoing across the grass. I found a bench near the pond and sat quietly, watching the ripples move. The air was crisp, smelling faintly of smoke and rain. I closed my eyes, feeling the wind brush against my face. Everything felt still, but alive. It was in those quiet moments that I realized how far peace can travel. As I sat there, a small bell rang again somewhere nearby. It had followed me through so many phases of this journey that I couldn't help but smile. I didn't know what it symbolized anymore. Luck, fate, or maybe just coincidence. It didn't matter. It reminded me that life keeps giving signs, if you're calm enough to notice them. I stayed a little longer, watching ducks glide across the pond. For the first time, my thoughts weren't about the past or the future. They were simply about being here, now. On my way home, I stopped at a street vendor selling handmade jewelry. Among the pieces was a small red thread tied into a simple bracelet. I picked it up, smiling at the coincidence. The seller said it was meant to bring courage and luck. I bought it without hesitation. When I tied it around my wrist, I thought of the red thread on my old dress, the one I once hid in embarrassment. Now it was my favorite symbol. What I once tried to cut away had become part of my strength. Back home, I placed the bracelet beside my bed and started journaling again. I wrote about courage, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that stays quiet and steady. I thought about how that dinner taught me more than any kind word ever could. Pain, when faced honestly, becomes wisdom. I had learned to turn humiliation into self-respect, anger into direction, and fear into calm. I didn't thank his father, but I thanked life for the lesson. Sometimes the harshest moments shape the kindest people. I understood that now. A few months later, I was promoted officially. My name appeared in company newsletters, and coworkers congratulated me with genuine smiles. I accepted their kind words graciously, but I didn't let them define me. Success felt different this time. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about living right, with integrity and peace. After the ceremony, I walked outside and stood in the sunlight. The city looked bright, alive, and forgiving. I breathed deeply, realizing how simple happiness can be once you stop letting others measure it for you. That evening, I met with a few friends for dinner. It was nothing fancy, just a small local restaurant with laughter and comfort food. We shared stories, joked about work, and talked about dreams. No judgments, no pretenses, just real people connecting. I realized that the tables we sit at matter. Some drain you, others feed your soul. This one felt right. It reminded me that we always have the power to choose which rooms, which people, and which moments deserve our presence. That's what real self-worth looks like. After dinner, I walked home alone, under the soft glow of streetlights. My shoes clicked gently on the pavement, and the night breeze felt kind against my skin. I thought about how much lighter life feels when you stop fighting for approval, you stop explaining yourself, you stop apologizing for being who you are. Freedom doesn't come from rebellion, it comes from peace. Every step that night felt like one away from my past, and one closer to the person I was always meant to be. It felt right. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The view wasn't impressive, just rooftops and streetlights, but it felt like mine. I thought about how different it was from that expensive restaurant. No chandeliers, no silverware, no polished people pretending to be kind. Just me, the city, and peace. I realized I didn't want luxury. I wanted authenticity. I wanted real conversations, honest laughter, and quiet nights like this. I raised my glass, not to anyone else, but to myself, for surviving, learning, and staying true. The next morning, I found an envelope slid under my door. Inside was a small card from the bakery woman I'd helped months ago. It said, "We made it. Thank you." There was also a voucher for free pastries anytime I visited. I laughed softly, touched by the gesture. I pinned the card to my fridge as a reminder that kindness multiplies. When you lift others, you lift yourself too. That was something his father would never understand, and that was his loss, not mine. The thought no longer hurt. Later that day, I visited the bakery again. It was busier than ever. The woman waved when she saw me and handed me a small box. Inside were 2 cupcakes, decorated with tiny red ribbons. I thanked her and told her how proud I was of her progress. She said it was because I believed in her when others didn't. Her words hit me quietly. I realized that believing in others comes easy once you learn to believe in yourself first. That was the real gift of everything I'd been through. That night, I sat on my balcony, eating one of the cupcakes while the city hummed below. It was peaceful, like every noise belonged in its place. I looked up at the stars scattered faintly above the buildings. Life wasn't perfect, but it finally made sense. Every sharp word, every moment of silence, every test, it all led here. I didn't need to forgive anyone else anymore. I just needed to live fully, without bitterness. That, I realized, is what real victory feels like. Quiet, steady, and completely my own. As the days went on, work became smoother, and life simpler. My mornings started with gratitude, not worry. I stopped waiting for things to go wrong, and began trusting that I could handle them when they did. That shift changed everything. I wasn't seeking peace anymore. I was living it. Every coffee cup, every walk, every conversation carried calm. The girl who once trembled under judgment now stood tall in her truth, and she didn't owe anyone an explanation for her peace. She had earned it honestly, without noise. One evening, I walked past a mirror in a shop window and caught my reflection again. This time, I stopped and really looked. I saw strength in the softness of my face, grace in the lines forming near my eyes. I smiled, not to admire, but to acknowledge the person I'd become. That version of me from that dinner wouldn't recognize this one. And that's okay. Growth often looks like unrecognizable peace. I touched the red bracelet on my wrist and whispered quietly to myself, "You made it." That weekend, I visited my mother again. We spent the day gardening in her backyard. She pointed out the new flowers she had planted and laughed about how stubborn the soil was. I told her I understood that feeling. We talked about resilience, about how it's not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just showing up every day, doing your best. As the sun began to set, she handed me a small jar of her homemade jam. I hugged her tightly, grateful for every root she helped me grow. That night, back home, I made toast and spread the jam carefully. The taste was sweet and comforting, reminding me of simpler times. I sat at the table, savoring every bite, thinking about how healing can be quiet. You don't always notice it happening until one day you realize you're not hurting anymore. I finished eating, washed the dishes, and looked around my kitchen. Everything was exactly where it belonged. So was I. The peace that once felt unreachable was now as ordinary as breathing, and that felt beautiful. As I prepared for bed, I looked at the bracelet on my wrist one last time before turning off the light. The red thread glowed softly under the lamp. It wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a reminder of everything I'd overcome. I lay down, eyes heavy, but mind calm. The sound of the city outside faded into a quiet hum. I thought about how far I'd come from that single cruel word, how it no longer had any hold on me. It was just noise, and I had outgrown it. The next morning, sunlight filled my room with soft gold. I got ready for work, tying my hair back and glancing once more at my reflection. There was something steady in my eyes now, a quiet strength I hadn't seen before. Life didn't feel like something to survive anymore. It felt like something to shape. As I left the apartment, I caught sight of the jar of coffee beans on my counter. I smiled. I didn't need reminders of what I'd overcome, but I appreciated having them. They grounded me. At work, my team gathered to celebrate the success of our latest project. There was laughter, homemade snacks, and the kind of warmth that didn't have to be earned. My boss gave a short speech, praising everyone's dedication. When he mentioned my name, I didn't feel shy or awkward. I just nodded, accepting it like it belonged. It wasn't about being perfect anymore. It was about being present. For the first time, I truly understood that confidence isn't loud. It's the calm that comes when you finally know who you are. Later that day, I stepped outside for a walk. The city buzzed with movement. People crossing streets, vendors calling out, buses pulling up to curbs. Amid all that chaos, I felt peaceful. I passed by a florist and decided to buy myself a single white lily. It wasn't for any reason or occasion. It was just a small reminder that self-respect can bloom quietly, even in noise. I carried it home carefully, watching how something so delicate could hold its head high without needing anyone to notice. That felt powerful. That evening, as I watered my plants, I thought about the strange journey that led here. It began with a dinner, an insult, and silence that could have destroyed me, but it hadn't. Instead, it had introduced me to myself. I remembered the fear of that night, the calm that followed, and the voice that finally spoke when everyone else stayed quiet. That voice never left me again. It was with me in every decision now, guiding me softly. Strength wasn't something I gained. It was something I uncovered. After finishing dinner, I cleaned the dishes and opened the window to let the night air in. The city outside was calm, with faint sounds of traffic and laughter echoing from distant streets. I leaned on the windowsill, thinking about forgiveness, not for him, but for myself. For all the times I stayed silent when I should have spoken, for the times I settled for less than I deserved. Forgiving myself felt harder, but also more freeing. You can't rewrite your past, but you can stop letting it write you. The following weekend, I visited a small art exhibit near the river. It showcased pieces made by local women, each telling their own story through paintings and sculptures. One piece caught my attention, a canvas painted with a single red thread running across it. The artist's note said it represented resilience and continuity. I stood there staring at it, smiling quietly. That same thread had been part of my story too. Life was funny that way. It kept sending you mirrors until you finally recognized yourself in them. As I walked out of the gallery, the breeze carried the sound of the river below. I stopped at the railing and watched the water move steadily, never rushing, never stopping. I thought about how peace isn't about stillness. It's about flow. You can't stop the current, but you can learn to move with it. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. Every mistake, every heartbreak, every word that once hurt, they had all become stepping stones in the stream that carried me forward. I wasn't resisting anymore. That night, I called my mother again. She was watching her favorite show and laughed when she picked up. We talked about small things, like recipes and weather. Before hanging up, she said she was proud of me. Not because of success, but because of peace. That word stayed with me long after the call ended. Peace. It wasn't something you find, it was something you build, piece by piece, with boundaries, honesty, and forgiveness. I wrote it on a sticky note and placed it on my mirror as a reminder. Days turned into weeks, and my life continued with gentle rhythm. Work, home, walks, quiet evenings, all steady, all full. I began hosting small gatherings at my apartment, inviting neighbors for coffee. We laughed about everyday things, nothing grand. I found joy in simplicity, the kind of joy that doesn't demand attention or approval. My happiness was no longer fragile. It didn't depend on anyone else's behavior. That realization felt like freedom, the kind you can't lose once you've tasted it. I didn't need a celebration, my peace was enough. One afternoon, as I walked home from work, I passed the restaurant where it all began. The golden letters still gleamed under the setting sun. Through the glass, I saw people laughing, toasting, pretending to be perfect. I paused, not in pain, but reflection. I realized that if that night hadn't happened, I might still be chasing their approval. That insult, cruel as it was, had set me free. I smiled softly and kept walking, leaving that version of myself behind for good. Some closures come quietly, without goodbyes. The evening air carried the smell of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor. I bought a small bag and sat on a bench to eat them while watching the sky turn orange. The warmth of the chestnuts against my palms reminded me how even small comforts can heal what grand gestures can't. Life wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about living kindly to myself and to others. Every small act of grace mattered. Every calm decision added up to something bigger than revenge. It added up to peace. The next morning, I woke early and opened my window. The city was still half asleep, and the sky glowed faintly pink. Birds gathered on the electric wires, singing softly. I stood there for a while, holding a mug of coffee, letting the warmth seep into my hands. I didn't think about the past or the future. Just that moment, the smell of coffee, the early light, the quiet city. That was happiness, I realized. It was never something you chased. It was something you allowed yourself to feel when you stopped running. Later that day, I visited the bakery again. The woman greeted me with a wide smile and handed me a slice of her newest cake. She said it was her grandmother's recipe, something that took patience to perfect. I tasted it. It was simple but rich. She asked if I liked it. I told her it was perfect because it was honest, not trying to impress anyone. She laughed and said, "That's what I aim for." We understood each other. The best things in life don't need polish. They just need heart. As I walked home, the sound of church bells echoed through the city again. It made me pause, listening as the sound faded into the distance. Every time I heard those bells, I thought of beginnings, not endings. Maybe that was the lesson life had been teaching me all along. There's no single victory, no final moment of triumph. Just quiet beginnings hidden inside endings, waiting for us to notice them. I smiled, continuing down the street, letting the bells fade into memory like a gentle promise. That evening I placed the lily I'd bought days ago into a glass vase on the table. Its white petals had begun to open fully. I sat down, eating dinner beside it, the light catching on the red thread bracelet around my wrist. It felt symbolic, the red and white together, resilience and peace. I realized everything I had now was built from moments of pain turned into clarity. Nothing was wasted. Even the worst parts had meaning. The girl who once felt small had built a life of quiet strength. After dinner, I wrote another journal entry. This one wasn't about growth or reflection. It was about gratitude. I listed small things: the smell of rain, my mother's laughter, the bell's sound, warm bread, the kindness of strangers. I ended it with one sentence: I am free. Writing it made my chest tighten in a good way. I had waited years to feel that truth, without hesitation. I closed the notebook and smiled. Peace wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, simple, and beautifully ordinary, and that was enough. The next day, while walking to work, I saw a young woman sitting on a bench outside a cafe. She looked nervous, clutching a folder and checking her reflection in the window. I recognized that look. It was the same one I'd worn years ago, trying to fit in somewhere that felt too big. I stopped, smiled, and told her she looked confident. She laughed nervously, but thanked me. As I walked away, I hoped she would carry that warmth into her day. Sometimes, healing means becoming who you once needed. At work, one of my team members asked how I always stayed calm. I told her it wasn't calm. It was clarity. Life is easier when you stop trying to control what others think. I shared that lesson because I wished someone had told me that years ago. She smiled and said she wanted to learn how to do that too. I told her she already was. Growth starts the moment you question why you shrink. I saw myself in her eyes for a brief second and felt grateful again. That night, I visited the riverfront again, the same spot where I once stood months ago. The water shimmered under the lights, and the city hummed softly in the distance. I watched the current move, carrying leaves and small branches along. Everything flowed naturally, effortlessly. I whispered a quiet thank you to the river for reminding me how to move forward. Letting go wasn't an act of weakness. It was an act of faith. I didn't need to hold on to anything anymore. I finally trusted the flow of my own life. On my way back, I passed a street artist painting under a lamppost. His canvas showed a woman standing in rain, looking upward with her hands open. Something about it made me stop. I asked if it was for sale. He said it wasn't finished yet. I smiled and told him it was already perfect. He grinned, saying, "Funny, that's what I tell myself when I'm stuck." His words stayed with me. Maybe we're all unfinished art, still beautiful, still worthy, even while becoming something more. That thought comforted me deeply. Back home, I hung my jacket, made tea, and turned off my phone. The world outside kept spinning, but my little space stayed still. I sat by the window. The night sky stretched wide and peaceful. I thought about how, once, I'd been afraid of silence. Now I welcomed it. Silence wasn't emptiness. It was space for everything real to finally be heard. I took a sip of tea and smiled softly. Life had come full circle, but not as an ending, as a beginning I could finally call my own. Weeks later, I hosted a small dinner at my place for friends and coworkers. The table was simple: homemade food, candles, laughter that filled the air easily. No judgment, no show, no pretending. As we ate, I looked around the table and realized this was the kind of celebration I always wanted. Real people, real warmth, real connection, the kind of dinner that built, not broke. I didn't say anything dramatic, I just smiled. The peace in that moment was louder than any insult, and it lasted long after they left. After cleaning up, I sat at the same table, the candle still flickering low. I remembered the night I walked out of that restaurant, leaving behind the insult and everything tied to it. That version of me was scared, but brave enough to act. She deserved gratitude. I whispered a thank you to her. Without her courage, I wouldn't be sitting here now, whole and content. Sometimes, we don't realize how strong we were until we meet the peace our strength created. I let that thought settle quietly inside me. Before bed, I walked out to my balcony one last time. The city lights stretched endlessly, like stars fallen to earth. The night air was cool, and somewhere in the distance, a bell chimed again. I smiled at the sound. It didn't signal change anymore, it confirmed it. Every note felt like closure, and beginning woven together. I touched the red thread around my wrist and whispered, "You're home." I meant it in every way possible. Home wasn't a place, it was this piece I'd built, brick by honest brick. When I finally went to bed, I felt calm in every part of me. No anger, no need for revenge, just quiet gratitude for how life had unfolded. The world outside carried on, unaware of my story. And that was fine. I didn't need acknowledgement. My peace was personal. I closed my eyes, the faint hum of the city blending with my steady breath. The woman who had once been called cheap trash had turned that wound into gold, and in her quiet apartment, she slept like someone who had truly healed.